Welcome to the Really American Podcast. Well, welcome to the Really American Podcast. I'm Chip Franklin here. Great to have you guys along. Of course, today was a big day, some Supreme Court decisions and trying to, ascertain what they mean to the American public. It doesn't look good, but hopefully there's more to it. Joining us today is Ben Feuer, an old friend of mine. I've had him on many times. He's a chairman of the Complex Appellate Litigation Group. It's a law firm in California and DC that specializes in sophisticated appellate and Supreme Court cases. And he's written about the Supreme Court and constitutional law matters for the Washington Post and LA Times, as well as other papers. The other guy I've known forever, so when we were little kids, Brian Karem is a veteran White House correspondent, writes a weekly column on the White House for Salon. He's a best-selling author, as well as his book is, of course, what's the title? Give me again.
Free the Press.
Free the Press. I knew that. I know. Anyway, he's the guy that was the first person to call Trump out and ask him if he would leave peacefully. And of course, we know how that all worked out. So we're talking today about some decisions and Alito's majority opinion on one of them, which I found ironic as hell. But actually, let's start with this one. Let's start with, if we can, the LGBT case. It took place where I'm from, Montgomery County, Maryland. And I'm going to give it a quick summary and then let you guys jump in and bring me back on track. The way I understand it was there's a Muslim family that didn't want their kid to see books in the school library about LGBT. And the one book in particular that they were talking about was a kid who was having trouble understanding who he was. I think he was 13. And it's apparently a really compassionate story about it, but they didn't want it in there. And they wanted to be able to opt out, I believe, of going in the library and doing work in the library. And they wouldn't remove the book. It went to the Supreme Court. And here's the weird part in Alito's decision. He says that they have the right, because of their religion, not to be offended, and that LGBT offends them. And I'm sure Black people offend a lot of people too. Do they have a religious right, to say that they don't want Black people around them? Ben, let me start with you. What about this case struck you? And I'll get to the weird irony in a minute. What struck you the strangest about this, or were you not surprised at all?
Well, listening to the oral argument, I wasn't surprised that this is how it came out. I thought that the petitioner were going to win on this one. But what struck me most was that, this is so reflective, in my view, of how our institutions have lost so much popular sort of respect and acceptance among the public schools being sort of one of those institutions. There was a time when, there was this general idea that most folks would send their kids to public schools and people would be educated on the basic ideas that everyone has a consensus about, everyone agrees with. Racism is bad, Nazis are bad, being part of society is good. And these were sort of basic, widely accepted views, and public schools could teach these and certainly could have them, the books about these ideas in their library when children were present. And that time has passed, that so many in our society have lost so much faith in all of our public institutions. And we've atomized in these very sort of, nuanced ways. Oh, my kid doesn't like LGBTQ. I don't want my kid to be exposed to these things. So therefore, my kid is going to have this special exception. And all of these other institutions that people would participate in broadly, people no longer do. The homeschooling rates are up dramatically. People aren't doing Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts or Girl Scouts.
Ben, can I jump in? Isn't there an element of all that of theocracy? I mean, a lot of the homeschooling was because they wanted to be able to teach their kids religion. I remember when this was really great, gaining momentum in the 90s. And then, you go back and look at this. Isn't there just a blaring irony here that under this decision, somebody could petition to have Bibles removed? If I'm an atheist, or if I'm in a Wiccan, or somebody that doesn't believe in monotheistic beliefs, Hindu, anybody, why couldn't I just say I want the Bibles taken out? Or in Oklahoma or one of these other states, the 10 Commandments. I mean, do you see that as a possible, a loophole in there?
Well, I don't even know if it's a loophole. I think the practical effects of how this is going to work are almost impossible to sort of think about, right? I mean, Montgomery County, Maryland is a very large and fairly well-off district. There are many much smaller districts in this country that have small libraries in their schools, and how they're going to track which students can't be in the library when which books are present. Like you say, maybe the Bible would offend some people, maybe other books, maybe historical books like Uncle
Time
Tom.
out. The Bible is extremely offensive. I mean, it has, you can, kill your wife for adultery. You can, I mean, if you go into the Old Testament, there's some crazy shit in there.
Sure. I mean,
Brian,
you would want to, but even more specifically to this case, right? A Muslim family may be
right.
offended by the presence of a Bible because it's different from what they believe in. A Christian family might be offended by the presence of the Quran in the school library. So the school libraries are going to probably take out all books like that,
Wow.
except in some districts, then they're going to get sued for removing the religious books and undermining individuals' religious freedoms. So the way this is going to spiral, it's just very hard to imagine the end point for this kind of litigation.
Well, the politics of this, Brian, I mean, in Washington, when you see LGBT is, I mean, I guess one of the ironies is that the same attorney that represented in Bush v. Gore was also the same attorney that I'm forgetting his name now. His wife died on 9/11 in the plane crash. You know what I'm talking about.
Ted Olson. Ted Olson.
Ted Olson was also part of the Supreme Court ruling that gay marriage was illegal. It was a legally admissible thing for them to enter into. But I mean, do you agree with me that there's some sort of weird theocracy that Trump is championing, and that explains Coney Barrett, it explains Cav? I mean,
well, let's unpack this a little bit. First of all, for many years, my kids went to school in Montgomery County. I know the school very well. I was the president of a PTA in Montgomery County.
That's a sad statement right there, dude.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, I saw more contentious PTA meetings than the so-called riots in LA, but that's another story. The PTA meetings could get pretty testy. And this is not new in Montgomery County. This has been ongoing for 20 or 30 years. But it
used to be a blue dog. For people who don't know Montgomery County, it's right outside of Washington, D.C. And for years, they had a Republican, Connie Morella, in Congress, their representative. And she was a Republican, but she was a blue dog Republican. And in other words, I mean, and this is the crazy part. It used to be that the blue dog Democrat was for fiscal responsibility, but also for social freedom, right? And what happened is now Trump is this guy who is actually spends like a liberal and is a social conservative. That's what the Republican MAGA party is.
Well, I don't even know if they're socially conservative as far as theocracy goes. I mean, Donald Trump is everything Donald Trump does is transactional. So he wants basically those who do feel very conservative belong to the Jesus Christ or the waving hands contingent of the citizenry. They will back him, so he backs them. Does it make any sense? No. This to the point that you made earlier, this is almost impossible to enforce. It's almost impossible to decipher. It makes no sense because at the end of the day, my point about being in a PTA was we had people come to us all the time that would complain about the Bible or there wasn't a Bible, or complain that my religion didn't get in. The Wilkins, the cell. I mean, I'm waiting for the Druids to come forward and go, "Hey, this is horrible for Druids. You got to put my Druid book in."
The Satanic Temple.
Yeah, but see, there are 10,000 religions on this planet. Give me a break.
Hey, Ben, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Are you surprised by Trump's nominees? I mean, there was some talk earlier that Coney Barrett was pushing back. Kavanaugh is a guy that, I mean, I didn't know him personally, but, I know the guy. I mean, we all went to the same Catholic schools. He went to Georgetown Prep. I went to Bishop Ireton in the DC area. And then in Gorsuch, I don't know Gorsuch as well, but I mean, and Roberts, those 4 votes on this, on this particular issue, are you surprised at all?
No. I mean, look, the Trump nominees, the Trump appointees you can't put them all in the same pile. You can't say, look,
Right.
we've got 6 conservative Republicans, 3 liberal Democrat appointees, and that's how all these cases are going to break down, because they don't. They really don't. The different justices really have different ways of interpreting the Constitution. The Republican appointees, whether from Trump or from some of the earlier ones, Bush or even Bush, the first Bush, they all have different ways of approaching the Constitution. They have a conservative approach. That is, they're probably going to have a view of a limited government power, and the Constitution should be interpreted in a narrow way that hews fairly closely to what the Constitution itself says and what, in their view, the original meaning of the Constitution was. But they have different ways of going about that. And the same thing with the liberal justices. They're going to have different ways, and they do have different ways of looking at the Constitution. Justice Kagan, an Obama appointee, more often goes with a conservative viewpoint than some of the later appointees, Justice Sotomayor and Justice Jackson. And then the Justice Alito and Justice Thomas have a much more conservative, sort of traditional Republican almost interpretation of the Constitution than Justices Barrett, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch all have different views. Roberts has his own interpretation of the Constitution. And so you can't really put them into piles and say, look, you got the conservatives and the liberals, and that's how this is going to come out, because they do look at it differently. On religious issues, the Republicans tend to be coalesce more around the idea of
6-3. I mean, it's 6-3. It went across. I mean, it didn't fall down basically, on conservative and liberal side. But the point is that what it did do, look, this was about a 2022 case that went to, it was kindergarten through elementary school, a book that, Uncle Bobby's Wedding or something. And originally you could opt out from it. And then the school board said you couldn't opt out from it. And that's what brought the lawsuit.
You mean they have to read it? You mean they have to read it?
Yeah, it was, but it was just there in the library to pick up in the beginning. Those are cases that have gone on forever. So it's not exactly that,
it's a different environment now. You know that.
Yes, it is a different environment now. But the point is what the school board was trying to tell people is that, look, we're trying to expose people to a variety of lifestyles, a variety of mindsets, a variety of viewpoints. So as they grow up, they become, compatible instead of, ignorant of each other. Yeah. And that's the point that at some point in time, they're going to have to address that. That's not addressed in this decision. Just they claim that this is parents' rights, that by God, we can let them, we've got, parents everywhere should be happy. To opt out of knowledge is not exactly going to make a lot of people happy. And it's going to contribute to more problems and more divisiveness going forward. Do I want my kid reading a book about Uncle Bobby's marriage? I don't give a shit. But at the end of the day, a lot of people, there are going to be a small number of people that do. So that 6-3 decision, I think, was based on I would say, and I'm sorry, but you all are far more versed in the constitutional law than I am. But I would say that at the end of the day, I think it was a poorly chosen defense. It was a very narrow victory, and I don't know that it goes forward. It will have the effect that they think it will have.
I think it's also important to look at, what you were talking about, Chip, with this idea of theocracy. In a way, this is a little bit to the other side of the coin, right? It's not saying that you must have our religious view. It's saying that people can choose to, in their religious views, not participate in this generally accepted, if we want to say that's generally accepted, messaging that the schools want to teach. So it's not really theocracy. In a way, it's the opposite of theocracy, but it does undermine the idea that in a functional, pluralistic society, people should have, some basic ideas that they all agree with, that we're going to be tolerant of one another, for example. And 2, that those basic ideas can and should be taught to anyone who chooses to participate in public school. You don't have to send your kid to public school. You could send your kid to Muslim private school, and they could learn Sharia or whatever it is they might teach in Muslim private school or Christian private school. And they could learn the 10 Commandments or the laws that you want to teach and the rules you want to teach. But if you're going to send your kids to public school, the idea is they're going to have an education that's going to give them a baseline viewpoint that is accepted by the majority of the people, the people in that population group, and that you have to participate in it, and that's part of the socializing aspect. So this
you're right.
undermines that.
I don't think you're right, but I'm
sorry. Go ahead.
I sense there is a real. I mean, the public opinion polls show that more than 50% of Americans believe that religion should be taught in schools. More than 50%, YouGov poll, not wrong. And I think a big problem with there is, and again, another irony. First of all, I mention the irony that it was.
Wait a minute.
It was a Muslim family. Do you think these Christians who are calling for Muslims, and they will soon, if there is a terror strike here because of the results of what happened in Tehran, they're going to be going after Muslims in this country with much more anger and vitriol than they did in 2001 and 2002. But let me fold this over, if I can, into the Texas story, because there's another aspect to this. It's similar, I think. And what Texas has essentially tried to do was to say that if you want to go on Pornhub, you got to prove you're an adult. You got to show some identification to get on Pornhub. And look, let's be honest here. Nobody wants 13-year-old kids watching gangbang and violent or whatever kind of sex you can see on Pornhub or any other of these sites. And there's
tell us, Chip, what can you see?
What is on Pornhub? I want to know. Tell me.
I was a fluffer in an earlier life. Anyway, no, but the truth is that you look at this story. So Texas said that. And the court said that, they weren't, you can interpret this better than I can, though, Ivan, that they didn't overstep themselves here, that they have a right to be able to limit the people in their state from seeing porn. But you know what this reminds me of? It's just like Trump and the Republican Party blaming Mexico for the drugs and the cartel's power while we're consuming the drugs. These parents give these kids 12 years old phones that allow them the entire architecture of everything bad at a click. And so, this responsibility the Republicans talk about, this bullshit about, its parents have to do that. Yet they go to court. That's not a conservative move. The conservative move would be to tell parents, get this software so your kids can't see it and work with your kids and explain to their kids. But they go the exact opposite way. That hypocrisy bothers me the most about this case.
Well, wait a minute. First of all, you can hack anything online, and a 12-year-old, how are you going to enforce this? What if a 12-year-old steals his dad's ID?
I'm not for any of this except for the conversation.
Yeah, it's all I'm saying is it's BS all the way around. You talk about more than 50% of the people don't want, or want religion taught in schools. Well, what did George Carlin say? Think of how stupid the average person is and realize half of them are stupider than that. I do not give the Supreme Court or this administration the benefit of the doubt when it comes to intelligence and what they're doing. Okay, so the hypocrisy is to be expected. Every day it's hypocrisy. You cannot teach tolerance. You can expose people to other ways of thinking, and hopefully they will come to tolerate, others but as far as porn goes, if you want to be, I love the people who say you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? But they want the government to legislate this? How about you take the responsibility? And I'll go even further. Every time I hear this garbage issue coming out of the Republicans, I will remind everyone I've been to several Democratic and Republican conventions, almost all of them since 1984. And in every case, the real freaky things that go on are at the Republican National Convention.
I know. All right.
There's where the glory holes are.
Prostitution rates go up much higher in the Republican convention.
Yeah,
so Ben, let me ask you something.
Bullshit.
But hold on, Ben. So the whole idea of Potter Stewart's, I know it when I see it, right? Pornography and what that is. I mean, to me, pornography is pulling a book because there's two boys holding hands, two teenage boys holding hands. And this is, you have kids that are, playing on Call of Duty or these dungeon games on, that for hours and hours, it's lining up to be the next Klebold and Harris. This is what's happening. The violence that these kids are exposed to, nobody's talking about. but
They
I don't
never
know.
have.
It's terrible, really. I mean, there's some interesting studies on James Bond movies and how in the James Bond movies, the amount of sex he's been having as the decades have gone on has gone down dramatically, but the amount of people he's killed have gone up dramatically. And that's sort of reflective of the way our society has taken many of these issues, right?
Hold on, I got to interrupt. Did you ever hear the George Carlin joke? He goes, "What I'd like to go back and substitute the word fuck for the word kill in all those Western movies." He goes like, "All right, Sheriff, now we're going to fuck you.
Right.
We're gonna fuck you good, right?"
Right. This is the American way, right? Is we're not lovers, we're fighters.
So tell us about
just
this case.
remember
Is there,
John
hold on,
Lennon.
Brian, hold on. This case. So is there anything to draw from this case on a national scale? Will other states be trying to do this? And how successful will they be?
I mean, some will. I mean, look, all of the points that you're making and that I'm sort of talking about here, these are great policy arguments, right? These are really great arguments to say, look, the legislature shouldn't regulate this, or should regulate it differently, or should regulate something else, or should regulate violence, or this doesn't work, or you're taking away parental responsibility. These are all very good policy arguments. The Supreme Court's focus, of course, is on the Constitution. Does the First Amendment say that the states cannot require some kind of age verification when young people have widespread access to very aggressive, very, very pornographic kinds of pornography? And I think the courts, there was very little doubt in my mind, frankly, that states are going to have the ability to regulate this kind of accessibility in the ways that those states see fit, and for young people, for people who are under the age of 18. And they may do it poorly or stupidly. It may overregulate, means that adults may not be able to get the pornography that they want to as easily as possible. People might not want to upload their IDs to a pornographic website. Those are all very good policies that people might complain about to the Texas state legislature. My limited understanding is that some of these websites have removed access if you're trying to access them from a Texas-based IP address. And of course, there are always ways around that. The technology is very sophisticated. You can hack just about anything. But for a lot of people,
all you need is a VPN that keeps you
or other
from identifying where you are, and then you can put it in, and you can hack it so that you have a fake ID. This will be the most
ways around it. But those are policy arguments for the legislature. Does the First Amendment prohibit states from putting in these kinds of limitations? I think absolutely not. Just like if a 13-year-old or a 9-year-old or a 7-year-old wanted to go to a pornographic bookstore or a pornographic movie store they used to be in Times Square. I don't know where exactly they are now in New York, but
one block east.
One block east, yeah, exactly. Just outside of Times Square, the law is probably going to require they ask for ID first, right? And this is that sort of thing online. It may not be effective, but does the First Amendment prohibit it? I think probably not.
Does the First Amendment protect pornography still?
Yes. Adults. The First Amendment protects pornography, but not obscenity. So there is a line now in our society today where there are really very crazy things accessible on the internet. It's very hard to know exactly what obscenity is. That's been historically, at least by
the court, Justice Potter argument.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Something that would offend the sensibilities of a normal person in a certain community. But what kind of community is that online?
Watching beavers have sex with raccoons does not bother me at all. That's that's some of this stuff is it's gonna sound silly when it comes into court. But what it is what you have to remember. This is not a policy. This is not a political thing. This is all having to do with religion and culture. This is the application of religion and culture to the law. And this is Donald Trump taking advantage of people. And it's the Supreme Court ruling to Donald Trump's advantage to take it. It's a grip.
This isn't a Donald Trump case. This is not a Donald Trump case. Neither of the cases we talked about were brought by the federal government. This is Ken Paxton representing the state of Texas. This is the voters of the state of Texas.
And where in Texas do you think he falls?
Absolutely. I mean, this is absolutely a view of people who have more conservative viewpoints. But I think there are plenty of people who are liberals or centrists who have kids who, look, my kid needs to be able to go online. They're going to be at their friend's house. They need to have a phone in order to access the internet. They can get around these blocks. I want there to be more limitations on the ability of young people.
You know what? I'm a parent. I'm a
That's
centrist.
a crazy religious idea.
I'm a parent. I'm a centrist. I take responsibility for this myself. That's the problem. Take responsibility. They're your kids. Take your own goddamn.
I got a question.
Perfectly fine policy argument, and that may carry the day, but it's not a constitutional argument.
Did the ruling come down with a Coke can and a pubic hair on it? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, it was a pubic hair, but sugar's bad these days, so it was on bottled water. No, wait a minute, microplastics.
Yeah.
It was.
I mean, I do wonder if you need to show ID to read the Ken Starr report on Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, look, this goes both ways. Or even though what Donald Trump said that he was going to do to women when he was in the locker room. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that's really nasty in our society from a sexual perspective. And
everybody, you know this too. Ben, Clinton wasn't impeached for having sex with Monica Lewinsky. He was impeached for lying to a federal judge in a deposition, Judge Weber.
Absolutely.
That's why he should have been removed from office, in my opinion. I mean,
was that your opinion at the time, Chip? Was that your opinion at the time?
No, I voted for him twice, and I was so. You know what upset me the most? Look, I grew up with a single mom and 4 older sisters, and I listened to guys like Clinton, and I met him. We got to meet him at the White House, and we got to go to a state dinner, the Irish state dinner, and it was. I found Hillary Clinton to be just remarkably friendly and look you in the eye and talk to you. I found Clinton to be off-put. It was just this. I mean, it was just a moment, right, in a receiving line. But when
people
it happened later,
he's the other way. People say he looks at you. I mean,
no,
I've never met him.
Yeah. Oh, my wife's been there.
Well, I know them both fairly well, and I will say that Hillary Clinton is one of the nicest people I've ever met, and Bill Clinton is one of the smartest people I've ever met. Now, would I want Bill Clinton to babysit my kids? Probably not. But that I didn't vote for him. When I did vote for him, I did not, and the people who voted for him didn't vote for him to be, a babysitter. They voted for him for another reason. The problem I had, Chip, was when he said, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Monica Lewinsky, before a judge and lie.
I was standing when he said that. I was at the WMAL newsroom, standing next to Joe Camerata. Do you know Joe Camerata? Yeah. He was Paula Jones' attorney.
Yeah.
And I actually got to meet Paula Jones, and I found her to be credible for starters, but also just very shy and a person that I could tell did not want this. And she kind of got caught up in this whole push from, I mean, the things that Carville said about her and the other women were just horrible. It was a difficult time. It wasn't like Trump, though, right? I mean, Democrats got to own their shit, and they don't enough.
Don't get me started. We have 2 political parties. One has no heart, one has no head. Yeah. And they're both got their problems. No matter how low the Republicans go, the Democrats can't crawl over the bar.
Okay, let me ask you a question, Ben. And this is, again, we're talking to Ben Feuer and Brian Karem. I'm Chip Franklin. The Supreme Court the rulings, I should say. We talked about the fun stuff, the porn and the LGBT, but
that was the fun stuff.
Yeah, this next one though is it's complicated because it's not the way I think it's being advertised as like, oh, Trump won the case of birthright citizenship. He didn't.
No, he didn't.
But the idea that we're still debating this, regardless of what.
Not still, suddenly debating this. This was not something anybody talked about or had any debate on until a couple of years ago, right?
Well, let me ask you that then right off the top. Do you think that you could make a case before the justices that it was obvious that this clause in the 14th Amendment awarding citizenship to people born here was intended for slaves to get citizenship and not any clue as to what, look, let's be honest. The area where I live right now, when my great grandfather was born, it's Mexico. I'm in San Diego right now, and that's just the case. But could you make a case that justices did not intend it to be used the way it's being used now?
That certainly at the time the amendment was enacted, the focus was on slaves. I mean, that's what people were thinking about. Immigration was not really in any way
We wanted immigrants at that time.
Yeah, and there were virtually no limitations on immigrating to the United States really until the early 20th century. And
no qualifications, just show up.
Show up, please. Come work. We've got farms. The country after the war was devastated. We need to rebuild. Please come here. We need people. We have this huge expanse to the west we're trying to fill because, boy, they didn't want Native Americans around. They wanted, non-Native Americans to come and fill those spaces. So that's certainly what they had in mind. But really, the way what they had in mind is what they wrote. Right, that's the way
best.
Thank you. What they
wanted it.
Right?
If it was supposed to be about slavery, it would have been written exclusively
they could have
for
easily
slavery.
They could very easily.
And if you read the history of the arguments of what in the writing, that was not the intent. The intent was not. It was for the future. It was for anyone who came over here. It's settled in argument. And if you read the debates in Congress, if you read the writing of this, it was very clear that this had nothing to do. It was more expansive than just about slavery. And my God, I do know. Having gone through this and researched this, it's very evident when they wrote this legislation that they meant more than just slaves. They meant for people who came over here. This was, and I think the words were for now in the future, in the arguments before Congress. So obviously they wanted more than just the slave. As Donald Trump said today in the briefing room, in his first appearance in that briefing room, in his new administration, it was more than about quote unquote slave babies. Sorry, Donald, you got it wrong.
They were right. I mean, they were thinking about adding states where people had been, not Americans before the states were added to the union. I mean, there were certainly a lot of things they weren't thinking about. They were definitely not thinking about people being able to fly over, have a baby, get American citizenship, and fly home.
Okay, so Ben,
but that doesn't matter, right? What controls what the Constitution says is what the Constitution says. That's always, or at least certainly in the modern era, the focus of judicial interpretation. And the Constitution does not limit this to children of slaves.
Let's circle back to that in a minute, because I want to ask you to explain exactly this decision and what it means. Yeah. It's not it's not as being advertised as this big victory for
the Supreme Court did not make any decisions today about what this clause of the Constitution means with regard to birthright citizenship. It did not address that issue at all. So in some ways, this is a good decision for Democrats in that they, or people who believe, I don't just want to limit that to Democrats, but many Republicans, many conservatives who view the birthright citizenship clause as applying to anyone born in the United States. And if you don't like that, just amend the Constitution to say something different. But that is not what the Supreme Court decided today. What the Supreme Court decided was the power of individual judges in district courts to issue injunctions that say that the federal government cannot do something anywhere in the country,
right,
based on the issue that's before them. And so this is in some ways a smaller ruling than it's being advertised as, having to do with birthright citizenship. That will come probably next term, but in some ways a much more expansive ruling than really any of the other rulings we've talked about today, at least in terms of how litigation has gone, constitutional litigation has gone in the last 10 years or so. Nationwide injunctions historically were very uncommon. When I say nationwide injunction, let me take a step back. An injunction is an order by a court saying that you must do something or you must not do something, right? That's what that is. And historically, and for almost all of American history, a case brought to a judge at a district court level, that's a trial judge in the federal system, that case has specific parties, and those specific parties are asking for relief for themselves. And judges would issue a ruling that applies to those specific parties. And then they could appeal that ruling. The party that lost could appeal that ruling to a circuit court. And the circuit court would issue rulings that applied to that circuit, which is usually a group of states in a different region. There are currently 11 federal circuits, but regionally there are 11 of them. right? There are 11 regional circuits, but I think maybe there are 13 total, but regional there are 11. And so those circuits can issue rulings that apply to the states that fall within those circuits. And then if someone doesn't like that, then they appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issues a ruling that applies to the whole country. And that's the way it's gone historically. So it was very unusual to get what's called a nationwide injunction, where a district court, someone would bring a case to a district court, and the district court would issue a ruling that says, this doesn't just apply to you, the parties who have brought this case to me, but this applies to everyone in the country. Okay. Right? Because all this was the Supreme Court protecting its own turf, because they don't want district courts making those decisions. The Supreme Court wants to be able to do that. Higher courts want to be able to do that. Let me throw something
in here, if I can, real quick, Ben, because I think this is really important, and it applies to what we're talking about in a really frightening group of scenarios. Emile Beauvais, Trump's former personal attorney, has been nominated for a federal judgeship, and he was before the Senate, and it came up that while he was his attorney, now he denied saying this to reporters, but it was actually heard this whistleblower who was a prosecutor and another person heard him say, ignore the judges. He told Trump and the others to ignore what they said. Now, when he got in front of the senators under oath, he said, I don't remember saying that, which is all bullshit, we know. But this is what, reminds me of the famous Andrew Jackson quote after the Supreme Court ruled against him. He said, let him try to enforce it. I mean, do you worry about that approach? I mean, Trump is this, in my opinion, if it looks like the Democrats are going to sweep in 2026, why not call the Insurrection Act? Why not do something to get people in the streets again and shut it all down? I know this sounds insane to a constitutional, authority like yourself, but I mean, we're talking about words and guns.
I mean, there are a lot of different issues in what you just sort of talked about that to unpack.
Let's go back to the Beauvais comment.
I don't think that really has anything to do with this particular issue of these nationwide injunctions. Because if the administration is going to ignore a court ruling, it doesn't matter whether the court ruling is just for an individual plaintiff or for a nationwide injunction. They're ignoring a court ruling, right?
Fair enough.
But the question here is whether you can go to an individual district court for something that you're saying the government is doing that's unconstitutional, and that district judge can say, hey, government, stop doing it. You can't do this anywhere. You've got to stop doing this now. You, the government, are in front of me, and I'm telling you, you've got to stop doing this everywhere. And this exploded in use. Really, it began during the Obama administration, tremendously increased during the Trump administration, went down somewhat during the Biden administration, but still, were used, and then has exploded again during the second Trump administration because Trump is doing so many things that are so radical, right? I mean, he's a radical guy, and I don't mean in a cool way. But one of the important features of this, of course, is that virtually 100% of nationwide injunctions have been issued against both Biden and Trump, have been issued by judges appointed by the other party, by president of the other party. So I think it really increases the perception that the courts are politically motivated.
Well, I think, Chip, the better question to ask is, will he defy the Supreme Court? Because defying a lower court is one thing, and defying the Supreme Court is quite another. And that's when you invoke the Andrew Jackson type of mentality. Let them enforce it. Because right now, the Supreme Court is the final word.
What if they impeached him and convicted him, which is unlikely, but what if it happened? What if he did?
Not going to happen.
Well, obviously, I mean, theoretically, it could. In other words,
not going to happen.
You're going to need
anything could happen.
Anything's theoretical. Not going to happen.
Okay. Has it ever happened? Any president ever been convicted? Was Johnson convicted?
No. We've never had a president who's been removed.
Johnson was won by one vote. One vote.
Hold on. So, if in fact, and play this out for us, Ben, and you tell, I love having you two together because you guys are so iconoclastically different. Ben has all, and I'm not saying you're not smart, but you're not, Brian. And but Ben is very smart.
Yes, my law degree means nothing. I understand.
Brian's outside beating Zeb Gorka in the parking lot. Anyway, But what if he was convicted and they told him he had to leave and he didn't? I mean, I know
that's not. I don't think that's a particularly big concern, because at a certain point, the keys. Someone else gets the keys to the house, right? Someone else's signature on a law is what matters, and someone else is the person who commands the military. So I don't think that that's a court question. And in fact, impeachment is very much not a court question, right? The courts really have nothing to do with impeachment. The Chief Justice oversees the trial in Congress, but the courts don't review impeachment.
To that point, let me ask you, to that point, you can't arrest a federal judge, right? A federal judge has to be impeached and convicted, and then you can arrest him, right?
Oh, it's a very complicated question.
Depends on
you
what.
certainly could arrest a federal judge if the federal judge commits a crime.
Right.
Murder, robbery.
Yeah,
the judge comes out and shoots somebody, you can arrest them, right? They cannot be removed from their judgeship without being impeached. But if they're charged with a crime, certainly if they're convicted of a crime, they almost universally will have been and will be removed. Judges have been impeached. Judges have been impeached almost always for committing crimes.
Okay.
Most recently there was a judge in Texas who was convicted of a criminal sexual harassment. Now, you have to really do criminal sexual harassment. You got to be doing some really intense.
And in Texas, at that,
he would not resign because he was collecting a pension from his while in prison. So Congress impeached him, and he's no longer collecting a pension.
Well, Newsom has had some strong words about standing up for the undocumented people in California, and we're still waiting on the Ninth Circuit, right? Have they decided what about they're going to do yet on?
They have decided, at least as in a preliminary sense of what's happening, and they've said that Trump was entitled to invoke the National Guard and went through the proper processes and did so properly to protect federal agents on federal, conducting federal law enforcement. And I frankly think that was probably the correct decision.
It was.
It
aligns with other decisions that have been made in the past and in fact it aligns perfectly with what happened when LA really was tortured by riots in 92. So I mean, it's exactly the same thing. I've got no problem with that.
It's fair to point out that the Ninth Circuit has also been known as the liberal, the Ninth Circus, as they used to call it, right?
Well, everything not anymore,
according to but
it is not anymore. It is an almost evenly balanced court between Democrats and Republicans. So the Ninth Circuit, you haven't heard anyone talking about trying to split the Ninth Circuit in quite a while, because it is now considered a much more evenly balanced court. It's now the Fifth Circuit that is considered the most extreme court to the right. The Fifth Circuit is in Texas. Its headquarters is in New Orleans, but it's primarily, Texas is the big state that falls within its group. But let's go back to these nationwide.
That's the one I was before when they jailed me. The Fifth Circuit. Those bastards.
That's another story. Let's go back to these injunctions.
But the nationwide, this is a big deal, right? Because there have been a tremendous number of nationwide injunctions. I think during Trump's first administration, there was something like 60 nationwide injunction issued by federal judges. And then, during the Biden administration, Republicans would run to Republican judges, often in Texas or Louisiana, where they thought they would get a favorable ruling. And those judges would issue a nationwide injunction. You may remember the judge who issued the injunction banning the FDA from allowing the approval of mifepristone. And that went all the way up to the Supreme Court that ultimately reversed. But that was a nationwide injunction. This judge said, look, FDA, you cannot approve this for anywhere in the country. And this, as in the Trump, years where he's, from a litigation perspective, really, taking the view that he's going to go as extreme as possible and see what sticks, see what he can get away with. They've been doing, tremendous things. So what this will do is this will lead to some level of chaos, especially in the first year or so, as cases work their way up through the legal system, which takes time. Where in some places, in some states or in some districts, the government will not be able to do whatever it's doing. For example, will not be able to say, we're denying you citizenship to this child who we think, your parents are immigrants. We don't think that you should have citizenship. We're going to deny you citizenship. And then that case has to go up through the percolate upwards, and in other states it has to percolate upwards. And some people in those positions may be denied citizenship. Some people, the courts may order to grant, the government to grant them citizenship. So there will be some element of chaos in many cases until the federal government, until the Supreme Court issues a ruling on those cases. And it doesn't issue a ruling on every case. So it could add chaos. But there are also other ways that the court pointed to that you can get to the same place. So, for example, people wanting to bring litigation. For example, if you think that the government is prohibiting people from having citizenship when they should have them, you could bring a class action. We think of class actions as usually being in business, right? Somebody, got overcharged by 3 pennies on everybody's phone bill. So everybody who got overcharged 3 pennies comes together in a class action, and you bring that lawsuit, and then the courts issue what's called class-wide relief. They issue a ruling that applies to the whole class. So here you could have, for example, a class of all persons, born or unborn, who our parents are from other countries, who are going to be denied citizenship under the Trump administration's position, and that they could go to a district court, and the district court could say, yes, I'm giving relief to this entire class. So there may be ways around the severity of the change of this ruling. But without otherwise, and on its face, the ruling is one that can have a significant impact in the short term, when especially the Trump administration takes extreme positions.
Okay, I kept you guys too long, and I appreciate you being here. Let me ask one last question for both of you. And I think part of it is, as I listen to you speak, Ben, it makes me realize just how many Americans would not be able to follow this. And it's not a knock on them. It's just, it's a busy life people have. And I think one of the things that Trump tapped into was talking like a truck driver to these people. Right. And that's really, and I think that's a real problem. And it kind of brings me to my next point, is that it seems to me that, you're not a strict constructionist. You look at the Constitution as malleable to a sort, right? I mean, right. And open to some interpretation. Okay. Does that mean maybe we need to expand the Supreme Court? I mean, I would rather have more people deciding this than you find in a pickup basketball game. If these are such important decisions, why not 17 or 22 people together? I mean, we should have more people in Congress, right? I mean, the districts are way too big. We should have.
I agree with that.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a time when people would know their congressperson, and now
no idea. Yeah.
Congress limited its size. Yeah.
So I mean, all it would take is, to have 60 votes in the Senate and a majority in the House to expand the Supreme Court. I
tend to think a better idea than expanding the Supreme Court would be something similar to term limits on
rotating them out. Yeah,
rotating them out. There have been some proposals over the years for 18-year terms, which is a fairly long time.
By the way, Ken, let's just stop right there, because I don't think people understand what you're saying, in that most people say, well, they have the job for life, but they have the federal job for life. They don't have the Supreme Court for life. Nowhere does it say that when you're a Supreme Court, you're a justice for life. It says you're a federal judge for life. So you could rotate them out without having to amend the Constitution.
I mean, there's some debate over whether you could do it without amending the Constitution. I think you probably could rotate them out. I don't know if you could make them a different kind of judge, but what you could say, for example, is that, the panel of the Supreme Court that will decide a case are the 9 most recently appointed justices. And, we're going to allow a new justice to be appointed every 2 years, for example. And that would work out with 9 justices every 2 years. You'd have an 18-year term, essentially, until you'd rotate out. And then if there's an absence, somebody dies or something, you need a temporary judge to fill a spot. Someone's got a conflict of interest. You could have one of the justices that have termed out come back and fill that spot.
Well,
and that might solve some of the problem, at least of justices being in there for 30, 40 years with very rigid views that may or may not reflect anything having to do with the society at the time.
One final point here, and I'm going to say this about you two. You guys should do a show together. And I mean that as a compliment of the highest order, because you both have ways of articulating the same subject in different ways that I think resonate differently for a wide variety of people. And I believe that's got to be the future. I mean, the irony that we have, in these iPhones, access to all the information on the world almost, and yet, we don't get past, porn or
and what's wrong with good porn? Come on.
Anyway, all right, fellas, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And we'll obviously keep an eye on this. So let's do it again in a few weeks if we can. All right.
Anytime.
All
Good
right.
to see you,
Thank you
Chip.
again.
Nice
The
to
Real
see you.
American Podcast. That's Ben Feuer, Brian Karem. I'm Chip Franklin. We'll see you next time.